Morning, Wabash. This week's speaking is Professor Warren Rosenberg. Professor Rosenberg came to Wabash directly from New York City, joining the English department in 1980. He teaches American literature, composition, African American literature, multicultural American literature, and gender studies. Here with his talk titled, Brooklyn Hoosier Finally Graduates, Professor Warren Rosenberg.
Thank you. I want to thank the Sphinx Club for allowing me to take this final chapel talk spot of the year. I would have said thanks for inviting me, as I've done in my past 3 talks when I was actually invited, and reluctantly agreed. Reluctantly because, frankly, chapel talks are scary time drains. Scary for me, and I know for others, because look at this place. It's big and feels like a church or a synagogue, evoking one of the scariest days of my life, my bar mitzvah. At least I don't have to sing this one in Hebrew, lucky for you. And a time drain because once you're slated to do it, you tend to think about it a lot, almost obsessively, because it feels like it matters. And it does for us in this place. It's one of the Wabash traditions that I was very glad to see return during my time here, and I thank the students for reviving it. Yes, I invited myself to give this chapel talk because I wanted to, in some public way, to say goodbye to Wabash after teaching here for 36 years. How to do that in a reasonable amount of time, to sum up almost 4 decades, when folks are beginning to get hungry, when they are thinking about other things like the awards chapel here tonight, or finals week, or graduation and summer. That's my challenge. And please raise your hands if you are going to be graduating this spring, okay? Or hope to be graduating. All right. Great. Said or hope to, but I'm sure you will. We still have a faculty vote on that. I will try to speak pretty directly to you, as in a sense I feel like I am finally graduating as well. That would be after 40 years at a liberal arts college, 4 at my alma mater, Brooklyn, and 36 years here at Wabash. Consequently, I've decided on the appropriate genre for this talk, a commencement address with a last will and testament chaser. Given the venue, there will also be a touch of sermon, so sorry about that. How someone retiring can be giving a commencement address may seem odd to you, but one of my aims today, as my title suggests, is to make a link between retiring and graduating. I also haven't given a commencement address since the last time I graduated top of my class, or the only time, and that was in 6th grade. I can't remember exactly what I said back then. It was 1959 or 60, and I think my dad actually wrote my most of the address, my valedictory address. But it was downhill from there in terms of class rank. So this is my chance. After 40 years, I feel almost ready now to deliver an address that can approach Bill Plaker's from 1970, the same year I was graduating from my alma mater. A speech that has been hanging over the heads of generations of Wabash commencement speakers. But as you have probably heard countless times from this podium in your time at Wabash, that was Bill Plaker. At 21, he somehow managed to have the wisdom of somebody, let's say 67. Some of us are slower learners. Luckily, I had Bill as a colleague for almost 30 years and learned a thing or two from him about teaching and about life. As you can already tell, I'll be mentioning many names during this talk because this is a career, in addition to being about books, which has been about people, close, meaningful engagement with people. If I don't mention your name this morning, please don't think that I don't care about you or that you did not mean anything to me in my time here. I can't tell you how many times I've sat out in that chapel waiting for the speaker to mention my name. What this proves is, of course, that Professor Bobby Horton is right. We are all narcissists or on the spectrum, which is why, of all people, I had to mention him second. Where are you? I know Bobby will accept that Bill had to get in there first, but if he can't, the counseling center is right downstairs. Let me begin by acknowledging some who are in attendance today so that they aren't sitting here being nervous about whether they will be mentioned or not, and because, frankly, they are the people I do love and who have meant the most to me. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law, Sylvine Marabato and Bob Allister, drove here from New Jersey for this event. Yeah. It's a long drive. They've been more than relatives by marriage. They have been close friends and confidants. I look forward to them becoming my neighbors as they are also here in Crawfordsville looking for a place to retire. So, yeah. Okay. More on that later. I want also to acknowledge my daughter Jessica, who flew in from the other coast, where she lives and works each day at one of the toughest but most important jobs one could have, teaching middle schoolers. Yeah. Yeah. She's a proud Oberlin graduate. No? I'm looking for Karen, Bronwyn, and Matt. Okay. Jess and I are intense sports buds, especially sharing our love for the Purdue women's basketball team and the Indiana Fever, and of course, for the Mets. With the exception of her mother, who I will mention next, Jess is the person in the world whose opinions I seek out and respect the most. My spouse, Julia, is probably the main reason why I'm choosing to graduate now. She's been out in the world after serving at Wabash as Director of Academic Support Services for over 30 years, and I want to join her. We love to travel, to take walks on the Sugar Creek Trail, to binge watch our favorite Netflix shows, and to sit side by side reading. I can't wait. Finally, I want to acknowledge some family. Who could not be here. My brother-in-law, Alan, and my mom, Kitty, they were planning to come, who is more responsible, of course, for my being here literally, and she's 91 now, but also here as an English professor as she introduced me to literature by reading to me, and made me a lover of stories as she is the best natural storyteller that I know. Finally, I wish my kid sister Robin could be here. She planned to be, but she is undergoing treatments for a recently diagnosed illness, and she's fighting some terrible side effects. To the person who typed out my dissertation, and I do mean typed on a typewriter, I dedicate this talk. Get well, Robin. Back to the commencement address. Classmates, what have I learned over the past 40 years of college that I can share with you as we strike out together into the real world in these difficult times? I want to share some hopefully useful insights that will help explain why it has taken me so long to graduate, meaning why I have not really wanted to graduate or to leave a college environment, and why I think I am finally ready to do so, and why I actually want to, although I must admit it has been a struggle this year to make this transition. I know that you students about to graduate are experiencing the same feelings now that I am, the excitement of moving on to a new phase of our lives, but also feeling fear about leaving an environment that has become finally comfortable, knowable, supportive, communal, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally fulfilling. Our identities as students, as learners, have been who we are. Who will we be now? I read a bachelor opinion piece last month by senior Brett Tom that said pretty much the same thing. Brent wrote about his impending graduation saying, "The real world is rough, a place where not everyone will be looking out for our best interests, and as a man, that scares me. I am leaving behind people that have changed my life, a best friend that I don't know what I will do without seeing every day, and a place that still is able to take my breath away when I'm sitting on the chapel steps at night," end quote. Brent eloquently expressed my feelings exactly, especially when he talks about being scared. So the major insight I want to share has to do with fear and how to engage it. Notice I didn't say how to overcome it or how to ignore it. Back in the fall, I woke up one morning pretty much overcome by fear. It was visceral. It was in my body. Thoughts then began to form. What was I doing retiring? I have this secure job that I love. I can still function. I can more than function. I'm actually pretty good at teaching college. But I had turned in my official retirement letter the week before. The die was cast. I realized that the fear was all about change, and so is real learning. To learn something new and worth learning means to move out of a safe space, to become, in a deep sense, transformed. As it has been for you, college, Wabash, in particular, has been my safe space, especially after I earned tenure 20 years ago. Why would a teacher who has dedicated his career to helping students learn, urging them to change through learning, not embrace change in my life? Confronting retirement has forced me to face the reality of my own fear of change. I now want to talk my way through this fear by using the tools of my trade, art, specifically books and films, and personal narrative, to help us both make this transition, if not easier, more understandable. Because isn't gaining understanding what we are ultimately all here for? It should be no surprise to anyone, knowing my 19th century American specialty, American literature, that I will start with Melville and Moby Dick, which I taught for the last time this semester to a class of 20 eager and engaged students. Ishmael, the novel's narrator, called a whale ship his Yale and Harvard College. But he began to grow and change even before he came aboard the Pequod. He overcame incredible fear, as you no doubt recall, when he was forced to share a bed in an inn with Queequeg, a gigantic, tattooed South Seas islander who had been peddling shrunken heads around Nantucket. After screaming for the landlord, when confronted by this dark native in his bedroom, Ishmael reluctantly spends the night sharing a bed with him, and by the next morning, they become bosom friends, kicking back, sharing a smoke, and exchanging pleasantries. That friendship lasts throughout the novel and would ultimately be responsible for saving Ishmael's life in the tragic denouement. Sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't read Moby Dick. It doesn't end well. Usually, we don't change in one night, as Ishmael did, and the label I gave myself in this talk, Brooklyn Hoosier, is evidence of a more gradual, yet still scary, change in myself that I did not fully recognize until deep in my time at Wabash. Moving from New York City, my hometown of 30 years, in 1980 to Crawfordsville, Indiana, and to a college I had never heard of, was a major and frightening leap. I had the New Yorker's awareness of the Midwest, a vision of Cary Grant running through a cornfield in Hitchcock's North by Northwest, and a year at Ann Arbor, which I realized later was about as Midwestern as calling a bottle of pop a soda. Where were the crowds, the smell of bus exhaust, the diversity, the excitement, and danger, the liberal Democrats? The moment that I realized that I had changed came in a bowling alley, Crawfordsville Lanes, a number of years ago. I was part of the faculty staff intramural bowling team, and I had the split-second decision to make as to what name I would write down on the scoring sheet. Brooklyn Hoosier popped into my mind, and I dutifully wrote it down, not giving it much thought, because let's face it, we had to beat the Lambda Chis, who were the dominant team at the time. Do we still have bowling? Do we still do that? Oh, good. I believe we did go on to win, however, due mostly to the dazzling roles of Chicago Tiger Doug Kalish, incredibly fast bowler, and New Orleans Vinegar Bend Stephen Murillo. Incredibly great bowlers. My calling myself Brooklyn Hoosier meant that on some deep subconscious level, I was clearly no longer the person, the New Yorker, I had been when I arrived at Wabash. My fear of this once new and unfamiliar place had given way to a semi-comfortable sense of belonging. Note I was still a hybrid Hoosier, but not the person I had been. That change was ultimately, I believe, a good thing. When about 15 years ago, I applied for a Fulbright lectureship in Belgium, I argued that in my application letter, that after living and teaching in the Midwest, I had become a better representative of America abroad. I did not just know New York City, but I had learned in a deep and meaningful way about a different part of the country and could confidently and authentically share that fuller knowledge of what it meant to be an American. My time at Wabash and living in Indiana had actually made me a different and less narrow person. How did this happen? How do we learn and change and overcome our fears without even being fully conscious of that change? First, it takes time. 4 years is a good start. But as you can see from my example, it can and very well may likely take you the rest of your lives. Second, meaningful learning takes intense and, I believe, face-to-face interactions with others who both care about you but also challenge you. Over the years, I have found Wabash an equally supportive as well as a demanding place to work and a consistently engaging intellectual and emotional environment in which to learn and grow. I will say more about my students over the years in a moment, but first I want to talk about my colleagues. Without a doubt, in my years at Wabash, my major support has come from my English department colleagues, past and present. You should all be so lucky, classmates, in your future co-workers. Seek them out, engage with them, let them push you to be better. Former department head, division head, and dean Don Herring taught me how to be a department chair. He was really one of the great ones. And also, how to defend American literature, which he considered a not yet entirely worthy addition to the canon of English literature. For him, Melville could not hold a candle to Dickens, and he rarely let me forget it. Bert Stern, Don Baker, Tom Campbell, Toby Herzog, and Mark Hudson were my colleagues for many years. Tom, Toby, and Mark for almost 30 years. To use former President Pat White's label for Wabash students, we were a band of brothers. And even taking into account the occasional conflicts brothers will have, we worked amazingly well together in an atmosphere of caring and mutual trust. That luckily did not change, even as the band broke up over time, and the department changed in the process. Joy Castro came in the late 90s and was eventually the first woman to chair our department. Remember, in the majority of my time at Wabash, faculty members named David outnumbered all female faculty combined. And that's oft said, but it was literally true. Joy was a brilliant, creative, and no-nonsense young woman. I urge you to listen to her last chapel talk, which I believe is still on YouTube, if you want to get a sense of her unmatched mastery of language and her passionate commitment to human rights and the values inherent in the liberal arts. Over time, our department has diversified and, in my mind, improved as a result with the arrival of Tim Lake, Agatha Sejak Brewer, and Eric Fries, gifted scholars, teachers, creative writers, and ultimate Frisbee players, and terrific colleagues. The future of the department seems bright indeed with them, and with Crystal Benedicts and Jill Lamberton continuing, our Amy Poehler and Tina Fey. I don't know. I don't know which is which. I just thought of that. They're both masterful, exciting teachers and serious, committed scholars of writing and literature. I would take a class with either of them in a minute, and I wish I had. And finally, I have been so lucky in my last year to be colleagues with Nate Marshall, who has taught me so much about poetry, about South Side of Chicago, and being a totally socially engaged human being. Nate's an amazing man. Other faculty and staff who have helped to create an atmosphere that helped move me through my fear to real learning would include some of the following. And remember, this list is not exclusive but representative, okay? I could name so many others. Peter and Brenda Bankert, who both counseled and taught several generations of students, taught me how to teach about gender and sexual orientation with commitment and courage at a time that it was a far less acceptable topic. Cheryl Hughes, my model for committed reflection, is a woman I see as a conscience of the college. I will never forget her moving introduction to my La Follette lecture in 2002. Bob Royalty has my never-ending gratitude for making me his second a few years ago on an immersion trip to Israel, a challenging and life-changing experience for me and for his students. We have to support these immersion trips. They are truly amazing. All of my colleagues All of my colleagues have helped me become a better teacher, but I want to single out Deborah Butler, Michelle Pittard, and Peter Frederick, each a consummate professional, and thank them for hours and hours of pedagogical gab. Finally, Horace Turner, longtime MXI director, cared more about helping Wabash students succeed than pretty much anyone ever employed at this college. I got this message during my on-campus interview in 1980 when Horace came to my room at the somewhat seedy Lew Wallace Motel, which is luckily now a parking lot, to inquire how serious I was about teaching African American literature. It was fairly late in the evening. I was already in my pajamas, but that didn't stop Horace. Very little did. These people clearly cared about their students, shared my passion for teaching, and pushed me to be my best. I want to transition from talking about colleagues to the centrality of students at Wabash in my life. The major reason I am torn about graduating, because they above all, you above all, have challenged and supported me every day. Without a doubt, it is the classroom interchange that I have lived for, and I still do. I have taught and learned from hundreds of students. I have those little green grade books going back to 1980. So I have all these grades, hundreds of students across my career. But I can only name a representative few in any detail, and have in fact selected only 3, but I hope you'll get the idea. Appropriately moving from colleagues to students is my colleague Michael Abbott, who apparently also has had trouble actually graduating from Wabash, as he is still here. Whether Wabash is unique in this or not, how often do professors get a chance to be one of the best men at our students' weddings? I had that honor sharing it with Jim Fisher when Michael married Professor Jen Young at the time, and I want to thank Jen for reading several drafts of this paper, this speech, and cutting it down from the 2 hours that it had been. So you can thank her for that. But Michael and my relationship started when he took my American literature class in the fall of 1984. I know he is now rolling his eyes at the 400th retelling of this, but I want it on record that he resisted me in class, and I loved it. It was so un-Midwestern. The way he questioned my choices of texts, a student from Frankfort, Indiana, of all places. That pushback changed me. It made me a better teacher for having to explain what I was teaching and why. Michael and I play golf, talk about Woody Allen, and this semester he chairs a committee that I am on. Relationships like this, beginning in the cauldron of classroom engagement and conflict, can clearly last a lifetime at a place like Wabash. My second representative student example, Greg Castañas, majored in English in the mid-'80s, and many know him now as a very active alum and former head of Wabash's National Alumni Organization. He is also a prominent attorney in Washington, D.C. I think it was in 1987, Greg asked to do an independent study with me in feminist criticism, and I agreed. We met several times a week in the Scarlet Inn, and we wrestled with the writings of Julia Kristeva, Judith Butler, Bell Hooks, and discussed concepts like the male gaze and essentialism. It was an extremely intense and exciting experience, I believe, for both of us. I would prepare as much as I would for a full class, as I knew the kind of mind Greg had, and I wanted to be ready for any questions he might raise. A few years ago, while driving, I heard an NPR story on a case that was being argued before the Supreme Court. The reporter said something like, and then Justice Scalia began to vigorously question Greg Castañas, the lawyer for the plaintiffs in the case. Over the next few minutes, she reported the give and take between Scalia and Castañas, but I just sat there grinning like an idiot. I had had a hand in preparing him for that moment. Right, Greg? I, of course, can't take full responsibility, but I know I had a hand in helping him learn to read more closely, in honing his argumentative skills, and in feeding his already growing appetite for justice. In the Scarlet Inn 20 years ago, we challenged each other and clearly both grew from the experience. My final representative student is Greg Huey. As a freshman from Southside Chicago, Greg took my Men and Masculinity freshman tutorial in the fall of 2008. He was, and still is, 6'5" or 6'6", a champion cheerleader, and was extremely shy in class, especially compared with his classmate, Reggie Steele. With his close ties to a single-mom household in Chicago, I thought Wabash would lose him. But he stayed, worked hard, and graduated. In his senior year, he was my research assistant, interviewing former tutorial students with confidence and skill. He has stayed in the area as a caseworker for Wabash Valley Mental Health and coaches cheerleading in local schools. He has also found his inner female as award-winning drag queen Mahogany Charlotte. Talk about my fear and need to change. I had never been to a drag show until Greg invited me last year, and I was pretty nervous. But I had fun, and I am so proud of the person he has become. I consider Greg a friend, and I thank him for helping me grow and change. This will be the hardest thing to give up in retirement, not forming new relationships with students. It happened again this year. My freshman tutorial group was amazing. I felt connected to each of them. And this semester, teaching my final classes, I have a great group in Multicultural American Lit and 20 guys taking my 3 novels and a film course, highlighting texts I've loved to teach and that reflect who I've been as a teacher and scholar. I could go on doing this job forever. But that would be the safe thing and might prevent me from continuing to learn. So I will be moving on, and that's okay. I've always secretly envied and respected those people who can try different things, different jobs. They had the courage to do that. Now I'm joining them and you as you move on. But I have an even deeper motive. My dad, who worked all of his life in jobs not as fulfilling as mine, he was a blue-collar worker, retired at 65, soon after he was diagnosed with cancer. And he died 14 months later, in 1986, at the exact same age I am now. He did not have the time to enjoy his retirement, to spend time with my mom, to see his grandchild grow up, and that makes me tremendously sad now, even 30 years later. I do want to enjoy myself for as long as I can, as much as I love my job, and it is a job, and I don't want to die in the middle of grading one more stack of papers. I especially don't want to die in the middle of a faculty meeting. So farewell, Wabash, and as a kind of parting gift, I want to make my last will and testament to you in the form of ideas. After 36 years on the faculty, I've noticed some things and have a few suggestions for continuing and enhancing the very powerful educational experience the college has traditionally provided. As you've heard, I believe that the basis for Wabash's educational success, indeed the basis of my growth these 36 years, is our close engagement with each other. Students with students, students with faculty, faculty with faculty, faculty with staff, staff with students. My suggestions are all aimed at maximizing that engagement. Let me begin with ideas that can be actualized without funding and move to larger ticket items. It's good it's the day after the fundraiser, and so we're feeling a little flush, maybe, I don't know. Of course, you can and will take these ideas or leave them. I just want to get them expressed. Let me start with the students. I mentioned how much I appreciated chapel being reintroduced by the Sphinx Club. I have felt, though, and I think the Sphinx Club would agree, that coming up with speakers each week can be a challenge. And doing anything weekly can become habitual and taken for granted. I want to propose bringing back another institution that was popular in my early years here. It was called It Seems to Me That. And I believe it was the brainchild of longtime political science professor and class of 1963 graduate Phil Mikesell. The idea was that anyone in the community could come up with a provocative topic, make a statement about it, and defend it in an open forum. We would have these during chapel period in a room like Center 216 or Baxter 114, or I suppose now we could use Hayes 319. And I remember them as exciting events that increased campus unity and helped us practice civil discourse. Signs would go up early in the week with statements like, "It seems to me that Wabash should do away with the lab science requirement." No. My div-free friends, I vote no on that. Okay. Or it's time for a woman president. Okay. All right. Or chapel sing should be abolished. No. Okay. Or transgender students should be admitted to Wabash. Actually, that wasn't a topic back then, but you get the idea. The speaker has 10 minutes to make a case, and then the floor is open for discussion and, as often happened, debate. You could alternate traditional chapel with these weekly events. Just an idea. A second idea directed at students also seeks to increase the quality of our interactions with others on campus. We've had a rough year at Wabash in terms of tragedies. And while each was different and had complex causes, I think one contributing factor was the inability of people, often men, to communicate their individual fears and pain. As my Men and Masculinity tutorials have studied through the years, there's something called the mask of masculinity that we put on to protect our emotional selves from being threatened or hurt. Men, of course, aren't the only ones to wear these masks. Like almost everything in human life, putting on the mask is a learned behavior, and I think we can also unlearn it. I want to thank Howard Hewitt, Professors Olafson, Benedicts, Pittard, Taylor, and a few weeks ago Hurl, for giving chapel talks that modeled for us how to get behind our masks to show each other who we really are. They were willing to be vulnerable in telling their personal stories, and that to me is the key to learning how to strike through the mask. Based on this, I have a suggestion for students, but of course it is applicable to everyone. You may know that the Malcolm X Institute periodically has sessions they call Brother to Brother, which I believe was started by Coach Clyde Morgan. Students and invited guests sit in a circle and draw questions out of a box that students had put in anonymously. While sometimes the questions can be funny or on light subjects, they are not always, and what follows is an open discussion about some difficult emotional and social issues. I'm sure similar conversations go on in fraternities and dorms, maybe in a less formal way. What I'm suggesting is broadening some form of brother to brother to the entire campus. Groups of 5 or 6 students from forming across living unit and academic year differences and interests to meet regularly for a set amount of time to engage in open discussion. I have an earlier model for this, and I'm suggesting it because I believe it changed my life in numerous positive ways. In the mid-'80s, an ad hoc group of male faculty got together each Saturday or Sunday morning for several hours, and this lasted for several years, for completely open conversation. The group, as we called it, consisted of Bert Stern, Peter Frederick, John Swan, Jim Fisher, and Doug Kalish. After breakfast at Hardee's, over which we shared college business and gossip, we moved to a lounge in the college or someone's den and spent the next few hours talking about issues in our lives, our marriages, our kids, our careers, our angers, and our fears. There was nothing off limits, and the feeling of relief I know I felt after each weekly session made me more ready to face the following week's challenges, both at work and at home. Seeing the vulnerabilities of my male friends made it easier for me to express my own without shame. Now, some of you may be thinking, this sounds like the support groups that are made fun of in the film Fight Club, a vestige of the feminist and men's movements of the 1970s. Well, you would be right. And my students know how I feel about Fight Club. How many here have seen Fight Club? Okay. How many have seen it more than once? Okay. As you know, I see it as one of the most dangerous and troubling films made in the last 20 years. Despite the paper current senior Derek Andre wrote as a freshman for my Masculinity in Lit and Film course, in which he argued that Fight Club was in essence anti-violence, good try, Derek, better luck at Duke Law School. The film quite clearly says that the only way men can feel close is by punching each other in the face, hard and repeatedly. I will not accept that. First, because I don't enjoy pain. And second, because I know from experience that it is a lie. There are other ways, and I think it takes more courage to open up and be honest with another man than it takes to take a swing or take a punch. Yeah, you can applaud. I would applaud. These kinds of discussions can happen in the classroom and out, so however you might want to decide this can be done, you can start some anti-Fight Club groups. Instead of Project Mayhem, you could call it Project Man Talk. I don't like that either. Come up with your own name for it. Okay. Shifting to faculty and starting with the no-cost suggestions. After working for the past few years as coordinator of faculty development, I want to urge my colleagues to spend even more time walking into colleagues' offices. Maybe not keeping our doors only slightly open will help in that. It's been a trend of having partially open doors. It bothers me. Okay. Teaching can be an isolating job. We need to interact with peers and not just at formal meetings. I have been lucky that colleagues need to walk by my office to get to the men's bathroom on the second floor of Center Hall. Maybe if it weren't for that geographical fact and biological necessity, David Blix would not periodically wander into my office on his way back from the bathroom to chat for 10 minutes. I think David would agree we have really good talks. Of course, I want to be careful with people's time and they with mine, but I think we tend to be too careful. I know that this is partly my personality and partly my heritage. We New York Jews love to schmooze, as apparently do some Ladoga Protestants, and even Quakers from Vermont. But I think we all do benefit from informal talks about our work and our lives. Now to the suggestions that will cost money. I know the college has experienced difficult financial times, but financial fears should not keep us from keeping our eye on what we need to do to continue our mission of excellent teaching and learning. The college has invested a great deal of money in new facilities, and these are needed and wonderful. I love those new dorms, don't get me wrong. But it is the people using these facilities we need to be investing more in. And it is to help these people that I make these suggestions. I am directing them to alums who might hear this, to members of our Board of Trustees, to Michelle Jansen in Advancement, to President Greg Hess, to Dean Scott Feller, and to you students who will be future alums, presumably donating to the college. First, I believe the faculty teaching load should be reduced from 3-3 to 3-2. Teaching 3 courses a semester, along with all the other expectations placed on faculty at Wabash, does not lead to the best possible learning outcomes for our students. During the past 4 years, due to administrative responsibilities, I've been teaching a 2-2 load. I have found myself with more time and energy, even with the added responsibilities, to focus even more on my teaching and, more importantly, on the needs of individual students. After teaching 3-3 for 30 years, I was amazed at how much more thinking I could do, how much more time I could spend planning and grading, how much improved my interactions were with students by the reduction of one class. This is ultimately what students are paying for when they come here, our full attention. And reducing the course load, even by 1 course per year, would help us do that. Second, we need to institute a pre-tenure leave policy. There is enormous pressure on new faculty at the college to become effective teachers. There is also pressure on them to be productive in their scholarly and creative work. These same faculty members often have young families. The first 4 or 5 years at the college can often feel overwhelming, forcing colleagues to sacrifice portions of their lives that just should not be sacrificed. I was extremely fortunate during my second year at the college to have a paid semester leave to do research and teach a course in Chicago. It was due to an external grant. I know that leave helped me earn tenure and, even more importantly, helped me to find balance in my life at a very stressful time. 3, we should expand the McLean, McTurnan, Arnold research grant from 1 to 3, 1 for each division of the college. Now all faculty compete for 1 paid semester of leave funded by this generous gift to the college. However, what that leads to is an apples and oranges comparison of applicants. A chemist is competing with a creative writer who is competing with an economist. This is unfair and very challenging for the selection committee. How can one winner be legitimately chosen? Since these awards are often used by faculty to supplement sabbatical leaves, increasing their number would allow more colleagues to afford full-year sabbaticals, which will lead to more productive and rejuvenated faculty. And finally, we should establish an endowment to support a teaching and learning center devoted to faculty development, perhaps calling it the Peter Frederick Teaching and Learning Center, after one of the national leaders in the field who taught at Wabash for over 30 years. Essentially, most college teachers receive little or no training in how to teach. I have very much enjoyed working with colleagues on improving our pedagogy, but my time has been paid for by soft money. We need to have a permanent funded position so that the most important activity, the reason for this place's existence, excellent teaching, is supported. I've been focusing on teaching faculty, but we all know that Wabash students learn from our entire staff. I see this learning going on when student-wise workers interact with administrative assistants like Violet Mayberry. They are learning, and she is teaching and learning. I've talked about faculty having more time to think, refresh, and refocus. We need to consider ways staff can do this as well. I know work schedules are less flexible, but some form of staff sabbatical could be instituted, and other enrichment activities that could guarantee that we continue to more effectively teach the whole student. Finally, I want to address the Board of Trustees. These dedicated alums have done an amazing job of guiding the college during my almost 4 decades here. And I'm not just saying this because trustee and my former student, Bill Wheeler, has gotten me great Mets tickets. It's nothing. The current chair of the board, Steve Bowen, is one of the wisest, most engaged alums I know, a true lifelong learner. So I'm suggesting something that I know he and the board have no doubt considered themselves, and that is to do more to diversify the board. Those who know me and my teaching and research know that I believe that diversity is a good in itself. The more varied viewpoints and life perspectives we encounter, the more we are pushed to see more broadly, resulting in an enlarged understanding of the world and better judgments and better decisions. I see this operating in my classroom every day. So I would suggest including at least 2 women on the board. Melissa Butler, of course, has been mentioned, but in the future, people like Cheryl Hughes, Kay Widows, Jen Abbott, Amanda Ingram, they would be great on the board, and other faculty that I have not mentioned. They would expand the board's thinking, increasing the numbers of underrepresented groups. We have some brilliant and accomplished Latino alums, and saving 1 or 2 slots for distinguished non-Wabash graduates. So there are my suggestions for now. Although since I'm not really going anywhere in the near future, I'll certainly have others to share in the locker room, the Scarlet Inn, and the 1832 Brew, whether you want to hear them or not. This was really, I hope, just a first draft of my last will and testament. Fellow graduates, as a literature professor, I feel obligated to leave you with a text recommendation that you can use to help you in this process of continued growth and change. I know the text I am thinking of has helped me. I will pause briefly for you to try to figure out what text I'm going to conclude with. You can call out possibilities. What would Rosenberg end with? Any ideas? Lone Ranger and Tonto fist fight in heaven, a Native American text. Good guess, but no. Any other possibilities? Song of Myself, Whitman. Perfect example, but no. But that's a good one. So we're in the interest of time, I'll tell you what it is. It's a film, and it's not The Big Lebowski, because I would tell you The Dude Abides. It's one of my favorite films I teach. No, it's Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day. That's the film. How many have seen it? Great. Maybe I can cut down on my summary. Those of you who know the film can figure this out. Bill Murray plays an arrogant, insufferable TV weatherman who's covering Groundhog Day in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania for the 4th year in a row. He likes no one, and no one likes him, including his attractive producer, Andy McDowell. After covering the story on February 2nd, Phil, the protagonist, returns to his bed and breakfast for the night. When he wakes up the next morning, the alarm clock goes off. It's the same thing again, right? It plays, "I've Got You, Babe." And after a while, Phil realizes that it's still February 2nd. That the day is repeating. Phil at first thinks he's insane, but eventually realizes that everyone else is repeating exactly what they did on the previous day, but only he has the power to change. But when he does change, their behaviors also change. This repeated day goes on and on for the duration of the film, but over time, Phil slowly begins to change, and by the end of the film, and countless repetitions of the day, which takes many years, we don't even know how many years it takes, he's totally transformed as a person. And spoiler alert, he not only becomes an accomplished pianist, learns French, and saves some lives, he gets the girl. They even decide to settle down in the small town, although they will only rent at first. As perhaps you can now see, in so many ways, this film mirrors my life teaching at Wabash in small town Crawfordsville. In my first few years here, like Phil, the alarm clock would go off and I would be facing the same job, although, as I've said, an enjoyable one, in the same small town and be the same person making the same mistakes. I see now that this could apply even more strongly to retiring in Crawfordsville. But what Phil ultimately learns after years is that changing ourselves, despite our resistance and fears, can be a good thing, and we can do it by observing and listening to and meaningfully engaging with others. For teachers, it provides the lesson that each day is fresh, and if we pay attention to our students, really listen to them, we can make the small changes the next day that will help them learn a bit better, and then do it again the next day. Phil ultimately gets the girl because he learns about her by listening to her, and he learns about himself, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and changes himself over time. The film then is the perfect parable for a liberal arts education and how it can change our lives if you take things seriously and give it enough time. My 36 years at Wabash have certainly changed mine. It is now finally February 3rd, and I and my Rita can move on to the next day. To end where I began with Bill Plaker's commencement address, he concluded by saying, "Have fun along the way." He said this even in the midst of the Vietnam War when things looked bleakest. Groundhog Day would not be the effective work it is if it were not also pretty hilarious. So I echo Bill, classmates, don't forget to have fun along the way. I know I've had plenty. Thank you.